At the Morgan family gala string lights, dangling like lies you tell yourself to keep tradition alive. Laughter bouncing off the rim of overfilled champagne flutes. My father lifted his glass, stared straight at me across the table and said, "Sienna, try not to cause another scene tonight." A few cousins snorted. My Aunt Eliza clinked her bracelet against her wine glass like it was a nervous tick. My mother, as always, stared down at her plate like maybe the carrots would offer her an escape route. No one said anything, neither did I. I pushed my chair back slow and steady, walked out past the carefully sculpted hedges that looked like they belonged in a European catalog, not someone's backyard. Got in my car, drove away. No shouting, no explanation, not even a slam of the door. Just a silence that sliced clean through years of trying to earn something resembling dignity from people who only respected titles, not truth. That was the last Morgan event I ever showed up to. Because that night, I finally accepted something I'd always known deep down, but never dared admit I was done auditioning for their approval. A year later, they found out I bought my first home not from a family newsletter or a phone call, but on Instagram. Through a post, Zoe tagged me in standing barefoot on the porch, string lights behind me, glowing like stars. I finally got to hang myself. Growing up as a Morgan meant you were either brilliant or invisible, preferably both. If you weren't wearing a tailored blazer by 16 or being courted by Ivy League recruiters by 18, you were labeled developing potential, which was basically code for "we don't know what to do with you, so we'll just pretend you don't exist." My brother Grant poster boy for success, Georgetown Law. Then straight into corporate litigation like he was born holding a briefcase. 2 kids' wife from a legacy family, Christmas cards in coordinated neutrals. My sister Vivian, MBA by 25, head of global marketing at some startup that sells pills made from mushrooms and self-love. Me, I painted murals in abandoned buildings as a teenager, rearranged thrift store furniture until it felt like art, built dioramas of imaginary cities out of broken teacups. I saw beauty in ruins, and they saw that as evidence something was wrong with me. I remember showing my dad a rendering I did for a community library redesign. It got selected for funding by the city's Urban Renewal Board. I thought maybe this time, just maybe. He looked at the drawings for all of 3 seconds and said, "So it's decorating." He didn't even mean it cruelly. That was the worst part. They didn't scream or throw plates. They just redirected the conversation. Like I was background noise in a family already too loud. "Viv just got back from Tel Aviv," Aunt Eliza would say. "She's pitching a mindfulness app to Google." Meanwhile, I'm holding a paintbrush with calluses on my fingers and dried clay in my cuticles. Invisible again. I once overheard Uncle Stuart at my cousin's wedding say Sienna's got the soul of a poet. Shame the world doesn't need poets anymore. He chuckled like it was wisdom, not a dismissal. By the time I was 30, I had stopped trying to convince them I mattered. I had my own design studio by then, a tiny one, sure, but filled with warmth and intention and honest-to-God beauty. My clients cried happy tears. My inbox was full of referrals. But still, in the eyes of the Morgans, I was playing house. Living a phase. Every holiday became another silent audition. I'd show up with handmade gifts, candles. I'd poured myself herb-infused oils wrapped in linen sketches of family homes from memory. Viv brought wine from France. Grant brought his latest business pitch. I brought quirky things and aesthetic vibes, apparently. It wasn't that they hated me. I think hate would have been easier to fight against. What they gave me was worse. They dismissed me with kindness. They deluded me with polite condescension. They always smiled while they erased me. I remember the exact moment the tipping point came. It wasn't dramatic. That's the funny thing. It never is. The real cracks form slowly until the whole thing collapses under the weight of what no one's saying. It was their 40th anniversary celebration. My mother and father married 4 decades. Viv planned the whole thing like it was a corporate retreat. There was a dress code, an RSVP deadline, a pre-printed seating chart like it was the Oscars. I showed up anyway, not because I wanted to be there, but because some small bruised part of me still wondered if maybe this time they'd notice. Maybe this time they'd let me be something more than the family eccentric. I wore a dress I'd made myself slate blue with a collar stitched by hand and soft pleats that whispered when I walked. I felt beautiful in it, like myself. Like I could stand next to anyone at that party and not feel like a footnote. During dinner, speeches began. Grant went first, quoted some dead economist, and praised Dad for teaching him discipline. Viv followed, talked about Mom's sacrifices, and thanked her for modeling womanhood and ambition. Everyone applauded. Then someone, probably my cousin Ellie, God bless her, called out, "Sienna, your turn." I stood. "And my father." He leaned back in his chair, chuckled low, and said, "Here comes the performance art." That laugh, that smirk. I'd seen it since I was 5 years old. It was the look that said, "We tolerate you." That should be enough. I just wanted to say I began thank you for showing us what endurance can look like. What it means to— "Let's not make it a TED Talk," he interrupted, raising his glass again. "Let's keep it light, yeah?" Laughter again, some nervous, some real. And in that moment, I saw it clearer than I ever had before. All the times I let myself get cropped out of my own story. All the times I thought love meant proving my worth. All the years I waited for their applause like it was oxygen. I sat down, quietly, calmly. Didn't cry, didn't argue. I just stopped. Stopped trying, stopped pleasing, stopped performing. Later that night, as music floated across the garden and guests danced beneath fairy lights, I stood barefoot by the koi pond. My dress shimmered under the string lights. My breath slowed, and I knew it was over. Not my relationship with them, but my need for them to understand me. That was the moment I left long before I ever got in the car. After the gala, no one called. Not the next morning, not the next week. Not even Vivian, who used to text me passive-aggressively about family events like she was doing me a favor. I suppose in their world, if you don't fight back, you must not care. But silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the only language left that doesn't lie. I didn't announce my exit. I didn't write a dramatic email or remove anyone from social media. I just stopped showing up. I let the invitations gather dust, ignored the Christmas brunch evite, left my name off the RSVP for Grant's second child's baptism. At first, the silence felt risky, like I was breaking some unspoken law. The Morgans didn't believe in cutting ties. They believed in smiling through disappointment and making veiled comments over roast duck. But I wasn't interested in quietly bleeding out anymore. So I left, not in a literal move across the world kind of way. Not yet. But emotionally, I vanished. I buried myself in work, designing spaces for people who actually listened when I asked what home meant to them. I painted in the mornings, took long walks in the evenings, rediscovered the rhythm of being alone without being lonely. Still, the city felt too close, like it remembered all the times I sat in my car, rehearsing answers to questions that never came. So I started looking casually at first, then with growing urgency. For quiet, for space, for something I could call mine without apology. 3 months later, I found it. A cottage nestled on the edge of a coastal town 3 hours away from the Morgans and their marble countertops. It had ivy curling up one side, a garden that looked like it had stories, and a creaky screen door that hummed when the wind shifted. The real estate agent kept calling it quaint, like it was a flaw. I called it air, the kind you breathe deep without coughing up expectations. I moved in quietly, wrapped in solitude, like a second skin. The town was small, charmingly nosy without being invasive. People asked how I was, not what I did. They waved when I walked by. They remembered my name after meeting me once. At first, it felt like stepping into someone else's life. Then it started feeling like I'd finally found mine. The cottage had good bones but needed love. I rolled up my sleeves and painted every wall with my own 2 hands, turning the kitchen a pale sunflower yellow, and the study into a watercolor blue that changed shades with the light. I replaced outdated fixtures with handmade ones I found at antique fairs, rewired lamps, rebuilt shelves. There was something healing about fixing what had been neglected. One rainy afternoon, I walked into the only bookstore in town, Bridget's Pages, run by a retired literature professor who wore mismatched earrings and smelled like old paper and honey soap. I was looking for a book on mid-century design. She handed me a dusty volume and said, "You have the hands of someone who rebuilds." I looked at her startled. "You can tell that by my hands." She smiled. "No, by the way you looked at the shelf, like you were trying to listen to it." People like that started trickling into my life. A florist named Isla, who grew wild arrangements from her backyard, and let me redesign her stall in exchange for eucalyptus bundles. An old carpenter named Ray, who taught me how to use a lathe without condescension. A former chef turned beekeeper named Jonah, who wore flannel and read Gabriel Garcia Marquez like scripture. We shared coffee-swapped stories worked in the same quiet rhythm of people who had all walked away from something that didn't love them back. I began sketching again. Not for clients, not for approval, but for me. My fingers remembered how to speak without permission. I filled pages with floor plans for places that didn't exist yet. Homes wrapped in skylights and gardens that bloomed in defiance of logic. I stopped trying to design for trends and started designing for breath. And then it happened. One morning while browsing an architecture blog, I saw one of my sunroom redesigns featured. A client had uploaded before and after photos with a caption that read, "My house finally feels like a hug." My name was tagged. 2 days later, I got an email from a boutique wellness retreat being developed in the Pacific Northwest. They had seen the post. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to lead the spatial design team. I read the message 3 times. It wasn't just a job. It was trust. The project became a portal, a chance to build something from nothing, not to impress, but to soothe. I traveled out to Oregon twice to survey the land, tall pines, misty mornings, wild earth. I mapped out communal spaces where strangers could feel less alone, designed rooms with floor-to-ceiling glass for light therapy and meditation nooks tucked into unexpected corners. Every decision was personal, every choice intentional. 6 months later, the retreat opened, and for the first time, my name was printed on something that mattered. A feature in an indie architecture magazine described the retreat as a living poem in wood and light. I didn't cry when I read the article. I smiled, then made tea. Because validation hits different when you didn't beg for it. The bonus wasn't astronomical, but it was enough. Enough to make a different kind of choice. I stopped renting and started looking. And then one overcast Tuesday morning, I found the house. It sat between 2 sleepy hills surrounded by pine. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows. A garden that caught fog like lace. A studio with skylights. I walked through the front door and felt my heartbeat slow, like my bones recognized something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I whispered aloud, "You can stop now. You're home." No posts, no announcements, no "look what I did" captions. Just a quiet closing, a quiet unpacking, a quiet beginning. The first thing I hung on the wall was a small linen print that said, "You do not need permission to take up space." And I believed it. It took me months, but I finally decided to host a gathering. Not a party, a gathering. I designed it, the invitations myself. Letterpress thick paper, gold ink. I sent them to people who had held my hand through the dark. A few old friends from art school, some clients turned confidants. Bridget, Isla, Ray, Jonah. 35 in total. Not one of them shared a last name with me. Not one of them would compare me to anyone else in the room. The house was ready by then. I'd spent weeks curating every corner, pendant lights that felt like golden halos, handmade candles in bergamot and amber. A garden table set under a linen canopy, each seat marked with wildflower arrangements grown by Isla herself. There was no seating chart, just room. As the sun dipped below the trees that night, guests arrived in slow waves, their voices weaving into each other like a soft tapestry. Someone said it felt like a film set. Someone else said it felt like coming home. And no one asked, "Did your dad help with this?" No one asked, "Where's the rest of your family?" Because this wasn't their story. This was mine. Later that evening, as the fire pit crackled and laughter danced across the garden, Zoe, my best friend since undergrad, pulled me aside, a glass of wine in one hand, her heels in the other. She looked at me for a long time and said, "You know this is your homecoming, right?" I shook my head barefoot on the mossy stone path. "No," I said. "This is the first time I've ever arrived, and I meant every word." The photo Zoe posted went live at 7:04 a.m. the next morning. Just a single shot, me barefoot, on the porch, hair, loose garden behind me, glowing with string lights like I'd woven stars into the hedges. I was holding a wine glass, laughing mid-turn, unposed, unbothered. The caption was simple. She was never lost, just never allowed to lead. It started slowly. A few likes, then comments. Old friends from design school, past clients, mentors I hadn't spoken to in years. "This is magic. You've always had this in you. Look at you, Sienna. Look at you." I read every word, sipping tea on the front steps, while fog clung low over the field. But buried among the celebration, between the glitter of affirmation, I saw the names I hadn't heard from in over a year. Vivian, Grant, Mom, and then Dad. None of them had been invited. But they saw everything. Of course they did. The first message came from Mom. I read it twice before responding, then didn't. It said, "The house looks expensive. Why didn't you tell us?" As if disclosure was something she'd earned. As if this was still her business. Vivienne chimed in a few hours later. "No hello? No congratulations. Just, seriously, you hosted an entire event and didn't think maybe we'd want to be there. Not we missed you. Not you look happy. Just hurt pride wrapped in guilt ribbon." Grant took a different route. He posted a throwback photo of us, one of those forced Christmas morning portraits. Matching pajamas, fake smiles, staged joy. His caption, "Some people forget where they came from." A few of his friends commented hearts and nostalgia emojis. Aunt Eliza replied, "Exactly. Family matters. Some forget." And then there was Dad. No caption, no emoji, just a screenshot of Zoe's post and one sentence underneath. "So this is who you are now." No question mark. Just punctuation made of judgment. I stared at the screen, not angry, just tired. There was nothing to say, nothing I owed them. Not anymore. Because if you go quiet long enough, you begin to hear the truth in things left unsaid. They hadn't asked about my life in over a year. Not once. Not when I moved. Not when my name appeared in Modern Dwelling. Not when the retreat opened with my designs etched into the wood beams. But now that people were clapping suddenly, I mattered again. Now that strangers applauded, I was once more worth possessing. What they couldn't accept was that I'd built something that didn't orbit them. They couldn't stand not being the gravity in the room. 3 days later, Vivienne posted a group photo from what she called the real Morgan dinner. Long table, fancy plates, tight smiles. Her caption was a direct dart. "Some things money can't buy, like real love, real family." I didn't react, but someone else did. Zoe screenshotted the entire thread and sent it to me with one word: performative. She was right, because this wasn't love, it was loss of narrative control. They weren't grieving me, they were grieving their grip. The next day I got an email. "Subject your choices," from Dad. No hi, no how are you? Just a paragraph. "We saw everything. You embarrassed this family. You acted like we didn't exist. You made people think we don't love you. Maybe next time, you'll think before putting on a show." People are talking. I read it, breathed in, then deleted it. Because yes, people were talking, but not the way he thought. A podcast host had emailed asking to feature my story, Designing a Life That Doesn't Ask Permission. An editor from Archline Quarterly requested a photo shoot for the winter issue. A nonprofit in Vermont wanted me to consult on community shelters designed with dignity. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to defend. I was proof, living, breathing wood and light proof, that you don't have to be seen to be whole. You just have to stop standing in front of mirrors, built by other people's shame. That evening, I lit candles along the garden wall, poured myself a glass of wine, and posted one sentence to my story, white text, black screen. "Silence isn't distance. Sometimes it's healing." They watched it, all of them. No one replied, until Vivienne did. Not with a lecture, not with a tag. Just a single message, coffee, then just us. No performance. I sat with it a long time. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I didn't want to say yes out of habit. Eventually, I typed neutral place, no expectations. We met the next afternoon at a quiet cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a cobbler's shop. The kind of place you can hear yourself think. She was already there when I arrived, spinning her spoon in a cappuccino she hadn't touched. "Hey," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Hey." Silence sat between us like a third sibling. After a long pause, she exhaled. "Look, I know we've been awful. I'm not here to justify any of it." She stirred again. Her hands were shaking, but seeing that party, not being there, it felt like a slap. I raised an eyebrow. "A slap, Viv. I've been invisible for decades. That wasn't revenge. That was the first time I celebrated without apology. She nodded slowly. I get that now, or at least I'm trying to. More silence. But this time it wasn't hostile, just real. You always scared us, she said eventually. You didn't follow the blueprint. You never fit in. That made you feel unpredictable. I smiled sadly, not smugly. You mean I refused to shrink? She swallowed. Exactly. She looked up, then really looked. Her voice was smaller. What would it take for us to try again? I let the question hang in the air before answering. You come in as an equal. No hierarchy, no mocking, no expectation of access. If you want to be in my life, it's on new terms. Not yours, not Dad's, mine. She blinked, then nodded. Okay, that's fair. She didn't ask to see the house, didn't ask to meet my friends or join the next gathering. She just said, "Can I try again?" I held her gaze. You can try. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a crack in the wall, the kind that lets light in. 2 weeks. Later, I got an email from Hearth and Form, a design magazine I had admired since my 20s. They wanted a full-feature Women Who Build Differently. I almost declined. Then I remembered all the years I stayed small to make others feel big. I said yes. The interview was raw. I talked about growing up in a home where silence was weaponized and success had only one definition. I didn't name names, but I named truths. About designing spaces not for status, but for safety. Not for admiration, but for restoration. When the article came out, the lead photo was me barefoot in my studio sunlight, pouring through the skylight's paint smudges on my hands. The caption read, Sienna Mallory, 32, built her space the way she lives deliberately, without asking for permission. It didn't go viral, but it reached the right people. Clients, mentors, women trying to carve space in rooms that didn't welcome them. A former professor messaged, "You made it out and made it matter." And one woman, a stranger, commented, "Your story made me walk away from a room where I was always the joke." Thank you. The Morgans didn't comment, didn't post, but I knew they saw it. And this time they stayed quiet, because they were no longer the narrators. They were just background noise in a story I finally owned. The article changed everything and nothing. My inbox overflowed for a week. A boutique design firm from Montreal asked if I'd mentor their junior architects. A publishing house reached out offering a book deal for essays on creative resilience. Someone even suggested a podcast. I didn't jump. I didn't scramble. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I answered only what made sense, then closed the laptop, went out to the garden barefoot, as always. I stood there as the sun dipped below the trees, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was building to escape. I was building to belong to myself. That weekend, I hosted another dinner. Not a grand affair, not a spectacle. Just 12 chairs, 2 long tables, warm lights strung low. I served slow roasted squash rosemary bread, still steaming from the oven, a pear and walnut salad with cinnamon vinaigrette. Everyone brought something. Ray brought hand-carved candle holders. Isla brought a bouquet she arranged blindfolded, her newest artistic experiment. Jonah brought his honey thick and golden in jars with no labels. We ate slowly, spoke softly. The kind of night where conversation loops like a river, never rushing, always returning. Zoe sat beside me, sipping ginger tea, her feet tucked up on the chair like we were back in our college apartment. She leaned over, voice barely above a whisper. "You know what I see when I look at this place?" I smiled without looking. "Tell me." She said, "I see a home that doesn't beg to be admired. It just exists, honestly, unapologetically, like you." I didn't reply, just reached over and squeezed her hand. And then just as we were clearing dessert plum tarts and mulled wine, Vivienne arrived. No grand entrance, no loud explanation. Just her standing at the garden gate in a soft gray coat, hair pulled back, holding a bottle of wine and a small bouquet of wildflowers that didn't look like they came from any store. I walked over, heart steady. She held the flowers out awkwardly, like a kid on her first school play. "They're from that stand down by the ferry. I didn't know if you still liked this kind of thing." I took them gently. I still do. She looked past me at the table, then back. "I'm not staying. I just wanted to show up for once. Even if it's late." I nodded. Showing up late is still showing up. She smiled barely, but it was there. Tell Zoe I brought her that wine she liked, the weird orange blend. Then she turned quiet as she came and walked back into the night. No speech, no guilt, just an offering. That's when I realized something had shifted. Not in her, in me. I didn't need to rebuild the bridge. I had already built the island. What came to visit could stay or go, but I wasn't crossing oceans for scraps anymore. A week later, Grant called. I let it ring, then listened to the voicemail while brewing tea. His voice was tight, like he was holding something in his chest too long. Hey, Sienna, look, I'm not good at this, but I read the article, and I just wanted to say I don't know. Maybe I never saw you clearly, but I do now. Anyway, that's all. Hope you're well. I didn't call back, but I wrote a note. Short, honest. Thank you. I'm doing well. Hope you are too. Folded it into an envelope. No return address, just his name. I wasn't being cold. I was being clear. The next few weeks moved like soft weather. Projects came and went. Mornings started with music and barefoot walks across dewy floors. Afternoons spent sketching on the sun porch. Evenings curled under blankets, watching fog press against the windows like memory. Every now and then, someone from the past would reappear. A cousin liking a post. An old teacher commenting on a design. Even Aunt Eliza sent a card unsigned, but unmistakably hers. Gold embossed with 2 words inside proud. Finally. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just closed the card and slid it into a drawer. Not everything needs a reply. Clarity, I've learned, is a language of its own. Then, one evening, as autumn leaned into winter, I got an invitation. Not from family, from Hearth and Form. They were hosting a small salon, an intimate gathering of featured designers. I wasn't just invited, I was the closing speaker. I almost declined. Then I remembered the night I walked away from that family gala in silence, wearing a dress I stitched myself, heart burning but steady. I remembered who I became when no one was watching. And I said yes. The event was held in a repurposed glass house turned gallery. Floor-to-ceiling panels let in moonlight. Low hum of conversation, clinking glasses, the occasional laugh echoing like warmth. I didn't prepare a script. I stood in front of that room and told the truth. I used to think belonging meant being accepted. Then I learned real belonging happens when you stop explaining yourself to people who never truly saw you. I paused, someone in the back wiped a tear. I design spaces now that let people exhale. Not perform, not impress, just breathe. Because for years I walked into rooms that looked like family but felt like exile. And I'm done with exile. When I finished, the applause didn't feel like praise. It felt like recognition. And that made all the difference. Afterward, a woman approached me. Maybe late 60s, eyes lined but kind. I have a daughter, she said, voice trembling. She's like you, fierce, gentle. And we didn't always know how to hold that. I'm trying to do better. Thank you for helping me see her. We hugged. That moment alone was worth every silent dinner, every ignored gift, every dismissal wrapped in politeness. On the flight home, I watched the landscape pass below, tiny towns, winding roads, pockets of light and darkness. I whispered a quiet promise to myself. You never have to go back to smallness to be loved. When I got home, Zoe was already waiting at my porch, 2 mugs in hand. You did it, she said. I smiled. No, I became it. That night, we sat under the string lights, the ones I strung a year ago, when this place was still more dream than memory. And I told her everything. About Vivian's flowers, Grant's voicemail, Aunt Eliza's card. She listened without interrupting, then leaned back and said, You didn't just build a home, Sienna. You built a boundary the right people know how to cross. And she was right. Because love, I've learned, isn't earned through sacrifice. It's offered where truth is safe. And the truth is, I no longer needed to be anyone else's success story to finally feel like my own. The idea came slowly, like fog rising from the fields behind the cottage, gentle, almost shy. A quiet thought that grew louder the more I let it breathe. I was pruning the rosemary hedge when it hit me. Not a party, not a performance, just a gathering, one last one, but this time it would be different. Not about validation, not about revenge. This time it would be about presence, my rules, my space. I started planning in silence. I didn't post anything, didn't float the idea past Zoe or Ray or anyone else who might try to steer it. I just moved from one detail to the next. I repainted the garden gate a deep moss green. I polished the long oak table, smoothing each groove like it was part of a memory. I strung new lights from cedar post to cedar post lower, this time closer to the conversations. I placed chairs where the light would fall gently on people's faces. I chose music that didn't beg to be noticed, but made you feel seen. The menu was simple herbed chicken roasted fennel and lavender honey cake. Everything grown baked or gathered within 10 miles. The invitations were handwritten. No calligraphy, no fancy cardstock, just soft cream paper and my own handwriting. I sent 30, 20 to the people who had built this new life with me, and 10 to the ones who hadn't been there but used to be. Vivian, Grant, Aunt Eliza, even Mom. No expectations, no pressure, just an open door. The note inside read, "I built something. If you want to see it, I'd like to share." I told Zoe last. She was cutting fresh mint when I finally said it. She didn't blink, just said, "You sure?" I nodded. I'm not inviting them to fix anything. I'm inviting them to witness it, once. She smiled. Then let's set the table. The day of the gathering received with soft light and slow clouds. The kind of weather that felt like a hush before something sacred. I wore a linen dress that I'd dyed myself with elderberries and chamomile, the color somewhere between dusk and blush. My hair was braided loosely, a sprig of rosemary tucked behind one ear. I didn't feel like a host. I felt like a keeper of something tender. Guests arrived slowly. Familiar faces, first Isla, with her arms full of dahlias, Ray carrying handmade salt cellars, Jonah offering a jar of honey that shimmered like gold in the afternoon sun. The table filled with laughter and quiet greetings. Someone played a soft instrumental on an old guitar. Zoe moved between guests like a gentle thread tying everyone together. Then, just as the sun began to slip behind the trees, the unfamiliar became familiar again. Vivian stepped into the garden first. She looked smaller somehow, not fragile, just quieter. She wore a navy dress I remembered from a past life and held a single sunflower, its stem wrapped in brown twine. "I thought this might belong here," she said. I took it without words and placed it in the vase at the center of the table. Grant followed. He looked like a man who had read too many of his own words and was ready to finally listen. He didn't say much, just hugged me. One arm, brief, but not empty. Aunt Eliza came alone. Dressed impeccably, of course, pearl silk scarf shoes that hadn't touched gravel in years. She surveyed the table, the lights, the food, then looked at me. "You were always the one who saw more than the rest of us wanted to admit," she said. "This is beautiful." That was the first time I'd ever heard her voice soften. And then, after everyone else had found their place, after the first glasses of wine had been poured, and the bread had been passed, my mother stepped through the gate. She looked at everything like she was trying to memorize it. Not just the garden, or the lights, or the food, but me. She had aged. Not in the way time ages us, but in the way grief and silence carve shadows into someone's posture. She walked slowly, hands clasped in front of her, and stopped a few feet away. "I don't want to say the wrong thing," she whispered. I stepped forward, "Then say something true." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I never knew how to love what I didn't understand. And that wasn't your fault." Her voice broke a little. "You've made something sacred here. And I'm sorry it took distance for me to see it." I didn't cry, not then. I just pulled out a chair and said, "There's space if you want it." And she sat down. The meal unfolded like a memory made new. Laughter bloomed in places where silence used to sit. Strangers shared stories. Old wounds didn't vanish, but they didn't echo either. For the first time, I saw all the versions of my life in one place, not competing, just coexisting. As the night deepened, we lit candles down the table one by one. I stood to say a few words, not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted to. I built this place out of stillness. I filled it with breath. Every corner carries the weight of things I once carried alone. But tonight, none of it feels heavy. I looked around the table. This isn't a beginning or an ending. It's a middle. A sacred pause where we meet ourselves without armor. Thank you for sitting here with me. After the meal, I wandered to the edge of the garden, barefoot of course, toes pressed into damp soil. Zoe joined me, leaning into my shoulder. "They came," she whispered. I nodded. They came. But more importantly, I stayed. And I realized then it wasn't about being right or being redeemed. It was about being rooted. That night, after everyone left, I didn't feel drained. I didn't replay conversations or analyze glances. I simply washed the dishes, folded the napkins, and walked through the house I built with bare feet and full heart. Before bed, I opened the windows wide, letting the cool air carry in the scent of rosemary and candle smoke. There was no need for closure. Because the table had already become its own kind of beginning, I woke the next morning to birdsong and a light wind pressing against the window panes, the kind of breeze that smells like cedar in memory. The garden still held echoes of last night wine glasses waiting to be rinsed, candle wax hardened like the end of a spell footprints in the damp grass. I stood barefoot on the porch again. Same place Zoe took that photo a year ago. But this time, no camera, no caption, just me and a stillness that didn't ache. I spent the morning slowly washing linens, pressing flower petals between pages of a design journal, collecting leftover bread for the compost. Every motion was gentle, almost ceremonial. I wasn't moving on from anything. I was moving deeper into it. That's the thing they never told us growing up. Healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, shaped like lavender oil and fresh sheets. Sometimes it's just doing the next right thing with your whole self present. By noon, I had received 4 messages. Isla wrote, "Last night felt like stepping into a painting I never wanted to leave." Jonah sent a photo of the table, the plates cleared, captioned, "Grace sits here." Vivian's was short, but raw. "You made something holy. I'm proud of you, even if I was late to see it." And from my mother, "I slept deeply for the first time in years." That one made me sit down and breathe slowly, as if my lungs had been waiting for that sentence. But there was one more message, a physical one left in my mailbox. A small manila envelope. No name, no return address. Just the word Sienna, handwritten in black ink, the kind my father always used. Inside was a folded piece of paper, thick stock, not his usual, typed. 1 paragraph. "I never understood you. That was my failure, not yours. You didn't embarrass this family, you escaped a version of it we refused to question. But watching you now, I see something I never let myself consider, that success has more than one face. You wear yours well. Don't let anyone make you question that again. G." No love, no apology, just a shift. Subtle but unmistakable. I reread it twice, then tucked it into the drawer next to Aunt Eliza's card. 2 artifacts from people who once only knew how to speak through silence or superiority. I didn't need more than that. Some people won't come all the way with you, but even a single step forward matters. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk along the cliffs, just beyond the edge of town. The air smelled like salt and damp stone. Waves crashed below like distant applause, not for me, just for existing. I sat on a weathered bench carved with initials I didn't recognize. It faced the sea, unmoved no matter the season. I liked that. I felt like that now. When I returned home, Zoe was sitting on the steps with 2 cups of tea. No words, just the quiet rhythm we'd fallen into over the years. We drank in silence, letting the late light stretch across the fields like golden thread. She finally spoke. "You've become the woman I always saw hiding under the versions they tried to force on you." I smiled, resting my head on her shoulder. I didn't become her by fighting. I became her by refusing to keep shrinking. She looked at me then. "Do you think they know who you really are now?" I shook my head gently. "That's not the point anymore. I know. That's enough." We sat there until the sky faded into ink. Then we lit a single lantern and left it on the porch, an offering to whatever future version of me might one day forget how far she's come. That week, the story from Hearth and Form got picked up by a larger publication. Not because I chased it, because someone else saw it and said, "More people need to read this." My inbox swelled again, messages from women in countries I'd never visited. Architects in Mumbai, designers in Cape Town, mothers in Toronto. You made me remember my voice. Your story cracked something open in me. I thought I was alone. I answered each one slowly, not with advice, but with reflection. I wasn't trying to lead. I was walking beside them, whispering, "You're not too much. You were just in rooms that couldn't hold you." Months passed. The garden changed. The lavender bloomed, then browned. The rosemary thickened. The wind carried new kinds of silence, ones filled with possibility. I took on only the projects that lit something inside me. I designed a reading nook for a shelter for survivors, a memory wall for a memory care center. I stopped needing to be impressive. I started needing to be intentional. One morning, I found an old journal in the back of my closet. It was from when I was 17. The cover was taped and water-stained. Inside, a single line stood out, written in uneven script. I just want to make something beautiful and have someone notice. I smiled and whispered to that younger version of myself, we did. And someone did. But more importantly, we noticed ourselves. That night, I hosted one final gathering before the season changed. Not a dinner, not an event. Just 5 chairs around a fire pit, mugs of cider, and a stack of blankets. Vivian came. So did Zoe. And Ray. And one guest, I didn't expect, my mother. She didn't speak much, just held her mug close, her eyes reflecting the fire. At one point, she turned to me and said, I missed so much, didn't I? I looked at her long and steady. Yes, but you came. That still counts. Later, as the fire dimmed and the sky turned violet, I stood and made one last quiet toast. To all the parts of us we were told to silence, and to the homes we built instead of waiting to be invited. They raised their mugs, and for a moment it was like the air itself bowed in agreement. As the last guest left, I walked the perimeter of the garden, checking each lantern, whispering a thank you to every stone, every beam, every seed that once held my heartbreak. I wasn't trying to forget anything. I was honoring what it took to arrive here. When I stepped back inside, I passed the mirror near the entryway. For years I had avoided it. Now I looked fully. I saw a woman with gentle eyes and a rooted stance. No performance, no apology, just presence. Not the golden child, not the disappointment, just Sienna. And that was more than enough, because I didn't just reclaim my story, I rewrote the ending. And this time, I made sure I got the last word. Story 2. I was reaching for a glass of water when my sister-in-law snapped. Rachel, could you check on the oven? The appetizers might be burning. I wasn't the chef. I wasn't even part of the staff. I was the one who signed the paychecks last quarter. But no one here knew that. Not yet. We were at the Whitmore family estate in Sonoma. All designer shoes and vintage wine. Where appearances mattered more than truth. I wore a plain black dress from a local boutique. They assumed I was help. I let them assign tasks, let them forget my title, my degrees, my company, let them talk down to me like I didn't belong here. Because tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they'd find out that the vineyard they vacation in every year, it belongs to the girl they kept trying to forget. People assume you need legacy to own land like this. They think vineyards are passed down through grandfathers with calloused hands and monogrammed cufflinks. But mine began with a greenhouse behind a rented duplex in Western Oregon. A plastic roof patched with duct tape, a dirt floor, and my mother's hands planting basil between shifts. My mother, Cecilia Morgan, raised me on soil and strategy. She worked 2 jobs most years, one cleaning rooms at a roadside motel, the other tending local greenhouses. No one remembered the name of. She'd come home with dirt on her jeans and sunburn on her neck, but somehow still managed to press my school uniforms and quiz me on math facts while dinner simmered. We didn't have heirlooms. We had grit. I never thought of myself as poor growing up, just determined. I wasn't the girl with designer shoes or summer camps in Vermont, but I was the girl who turned leftover library printouts into study guides and learned to code from books that still smelled like glue. I knew I wouldn't inherit anything, so I decided I'd earn it all myself. College was my first escape. I got into the University of Washington on a scholarship and rode the bus every morning at 5:45 a.m. to make my campus job at the research lab. I double majored in electrical engineering and sustainable systems, and I graduated in the top 5% of my class, something no one from my neighborhood had done in over a decade. That's where I met Daniel Whitmore. He was brilliant in a quiet, scholarly way, studied European political systems, wrote essays that professors passed around as examples. His family was old money. Sonoma estate dinners, tennis, and pressed whites, the kind of place where everyone assumed their wine was better because their name was on the label. Daniel was kind, though gentle. He held my backpack when we walked and wrote me notes in the margins of used books. He liked that I was practical, said it made him feel grounded. When we got married, I didn't expect the fairy tale, but I didn't expect to disappear either. At our wedding, his mother Elaine smiled politely for photos, but never once looked me in the eye. His sister Claire asked me if my mother would be bringing anything gluten-free, as if Cecilia was a caterer. Daniel didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. In the first few years, I let it slide. I was busy. I joined a clean energy startup in Seattle, helped design battery systems for off-grid farms. I traveled. I led pilot projects in drought-prone towns, and each time we visited the estate in Sonoma, I found myself retreating further into silence. They'd ask where I worked, then talk over my answer. They'd pour wine, then hand me a napkin like I should clean it up. They'd speak about family legacy like it was a blood right, and I clearly wasn't in their bloodstream. Still, I smiled. I took photos. I played my role because sometimes surviving in someone else's world is the first step toward building your own. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was at the harvest celebration 3 years ago. Daniel and I had just arrived late, having flown straight from a conference in Chicago. I still had my name badge on when we walked into the estate's courtyard, buzzing with string lights and string quartets. Elaine was near the entrance, surrounded by guests sipping wine older than my student loans. When she saw me, she leaned into someone beside her and said clear as glass, "She's fine, just not polished. Doesn't really blend with the circle, you know." She didn't know I heard her, but I did. I smiled, nodded, walked inside, and let that sentence burn into my memory like a brand not polished. Not one of them. That night, I opened my laptop in the guest room while Daniel slept and started running the numbers. I had savings, stock options, early investments in solar storage tech that had quietly paid off. And just like that, a new idea took root. If they were going to make me feel small for not inheriting land, I'd simply buy the land they stood on for the next 2 years. I shrank not physically. No one noticed the weight I lost or the way I started folding my shoulders inward in group photos. But something inside me got smaller every time I stepped into that estate and became the version of Rachel they expected. Pleasant, useful, invisible. I was always early to help, but never included in the group photos. They framed. I brought gifts from my travels, locally woven scarves, gourmet olive oil, handmade ceramics, and still got handed someone else's coat at the door at every family dinner. Elaine would ask the other daughters-in-law about their children's schools, their home renovations, their Pilates routines. When she turned to me, it was always the same question. "So, are you still working on your little tech thing?" Little? She called my company Little when I was consulting with 3 counties on smart grid transitions. Daniel would win. Sometimes he'd squeeze my hand under the table like an apology, but he never corrected her. He never said, "Actually, Rachel just helped cut emissions by 28% for a mid-sized city." He never said, "She runs teams across 2 states and mentors interns who idolize her." No, he just smiled and told me afterward, "She doesn't mean harm. It's a generational thing, but harm doesn't have to be sharp to leave bruises. Sometimes it comes in whispers, the kind that wear you down, like water, smoothing stone." At one spring gathering, I spent hours helping set the table in the vineyard's courtyard, arranging rosemary sprigs, folding napkins, checking place cards. When dinner began, there were only 14 chairs. There were 15 people. I offered to eat inside. No one objected. Later that night, Daniel said he hadn't noticed. I believed him, and that made it worse. There was the time I baked a citrus tart from scratch, Elaine's favorite, and left it in the kitchen with a note at dessert. She praised the caterer, said it was the best they've ever done. Claire once called me remarkably grounded in front of a table of guests, then added with a laugh, "Must be the farm roots, right?" They didn't see me, not really, but what they saw or didn't shape the way they treated me. And slowly, without realizing, I started treating myself the same way. I stopped correcting people when they got my title wrong. I stopped mentioning new projects unless someone asked, and no one ever did. I stopped wearing heels or makeup to family events, telling myself I preferred comfort, when really I was trying not to be noticed at all. I became a ghost in the house my husband came from, and I told myself it was fine because my real life existed outside their gates. But one afternoon, after a particularly grating lunch, where Daniel's uncle joked I should start a compost blog or something, I sat in the garden alone and realized something gutting. I had let them define the borders of my belonging, and worse, I'd complied. I had allowed them to shrink me to fit their narrative. That was the last time I left Sonoma feeling powerless, because that night on the flight home, I pulled out my journal and wrote one sentence across the top of the page. Don't fight to sit at their table. Build your own and buy the land beneath theirs. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to buy the land under their feet. It was slower than that. More strategic, like drip irrigation and dry soil. Quiet, constant, intentional. It started with a vineyard in northern Oregon. Not glamorous, not profitable, but undervalued and rich in potential. A colleague of mine, Alex, had left our energy firm to start a consulting group for sustainable agriculture. I reached out casually at first, asking questions. He didn't ask why. By the end of that week, I had invested in a 12-acre property that needed solar panels and new irrigation. Two things I knew intimately. From there, it became a pattern or rhythm. While Ellen and Claire debated whether the new champagne flutes were too modern, I was calculating return on investment models between rainwater harvesting and wind power credits. I didn't do it to prove anything at first. I did it because I needed something of my own, something real. The vineyards I bought weren't trophies. They were quiet acres that fed people hired locals adapted to climate pressures. I made my name discreetly. My holdings were tucked into a shell company, Northwood Harvest Partners, a name I chose after the wooded path behind my childhood home. Within 18 months, Northwood acquired minority shares in 4 vineyards across California. Within 30 months, we were majority owners in 3. I never told Daniel, not because I didn't trust him, but because he'd never asked. He noticed the business trips Seattle, Napa, Santa Rosa, and never questioned them. He assumed I was consulting for public energy boards, and technically he wasn't wrong. But the silence between us became a kind of fog-dense quiet and hard to explain. Once you were inside it, sometimes I'd come home from a site visit, hands smelling like soil and lavender, full of excitement about a new hybrid grape pilot, and he'd be grading essays about Cold War diplomacy. Too distracted to notice the mud on my boots, and I stopped trying to bridge the distance. Instead, I built more. I hired a lean but brilliant operations team, 1 logistics planner, 1 agricultural analyst, and a part-time attorney who reviewed lease contracts on Sundays. I met with winemakers who'd been ignored by old money estates. I listened to seasonal workers about what broke, what rotted, what never got fixed. By year 4, Northwood was ready for its biggest acquisition yet. Whitmore Estate Vineyards, the estate Daniel's family called their summer home. The same 1 lane used for holiday galas and women's legacy luncheons. The one they'd mortgaged too deeply after 2 bad harvests and a costly irrigation lawsuit. They didn't even see it coming. The property had been quietly listed under a broker network that specialized in private legacy transitions. My team made an offer through a separate entity, Pine Sol LLC. Elaine never blinked when she mentioned at Thanksgiving that some outside buyer was circling like a vulture. She scoffed at the idea that their land would ever be in the hands of strangers. I smiled into my wine glass and signed the purchase agreement the following Monday. The contract included a clause that allowed legacy families to retain event access for 5 years, a detail I kept not out of mercy but strategy. I didn't want to kick them out. I wanted them to arrive just like always, completely unaware. Let them bring their wine, their place cards, their smug assumptions. Let them look past me, like always. Because when the time came, I wanted their shock to be pure, unfiltered vintage. The Whitmore estate had always felt untouchable. It sat on a gentle slope of sun-drenched hills, framed by lavender rose and Chardonnay vines that stretched like perfectly combed hair. There were stories that parts of the land dated back to the gold rush, that Daniel's great-grandfather built the stone wine cellar by hand. The family spoke of it like it was their birthright, not just a property, but birthrights don't pay bank loans. The first cracks were small whispers. Mostly Elaine fretting over a new zoning regulation. Claire hinting at some issues with cash flow during one of her yoga brunch ramblings. Daniel brushed it off as cyclical, saying all vineyards had tough years. Then the gala got downsized. Every summer, the Whitmores hosted a charity wine gala for a local museum board. It was their pride and social currency, but that year the venue changed from their estate lawn to a rented hall in Santa Rosa. Elaine said it was for easier parking. I knew better. Then came the bigger fissure. The estate lost its lawsuit over a water diversion system they'd installed illegally 2 decades ago, something Elaine once bragged about as a clever little workaround. The court didn't agree the fine was steep. The repairs were worse. They tried to settle quietly, but settlements don't come cheap, so they did what proud families do when no one is watching. They sold discreetly through a private legacy transfer agency. The listing was quiet, hidden behind corporate speak, and a non-disclosure clause that would have made a hedge fund blush, but not quiet enough for me. By the time their broker reached out to Pinus Soul LLC, we were ready. My team moved quickly. Inspections, valuations, counteroffers. The estate was over-leveraged. Their desperation showed in the concessions. I made sure the event access clause stayed intact. 5 years of legacy family gathering rights. The document read up to 4 seasonal events annually. It was perfect. I didn't want revenge. I wanted ritual. I wanted them to keep coming year after year, unaware that the soil beneath their champagne flutes now carried my name. Daniel found out about the sale from a group text Claire sent, full of passive-aggressive optimism. "New ownership could be great," she wrote. "Maybe they'll actually fix the roof in the north wing." He read it aloud, then laughed. "Can you imagine strangers running the estate?" I just smiled and kissed his cheek. I don't know what felt sharper, his laughter or the ease with which I stayed silent. I returned the next summer like nothing had changed. Same suitcase, same plain cotton dress, same cautious smile when Elaine hugged me with both arms, but none of her heart. The family gathered as they always did, clinking glasses and greeting old vineyard hands like royalty congratulating each other on well-being each other. Claire had dyed her hair champagne blonde. Uncle Grant brought a new girlfriend half his age and twice his ego. Daniel helped unload wine cases like he'd never missed a harvest. No one noticed when I stepped aside to take a phone call from Ethan, the new estate manager I had handpicked 6 months ago. "Welcome back, boss," he said. I smiled. "Let's give them the weekend." Then we start inside the house. Everything looked the same. The oil portraits, the dusty china, the family crest engraved on silver napkin rings. But beneath the surface, every contract, every title deed, every security code had changed hands into mine. The kitchen staff wore new uniforms, sustainably sourced cotton, with a new logo embroidered on the sleeve. Northwood Harvest. Claire didn't even blink. She thought it was a new sponsor. On the second night, while we were setting the long table under the vineyard trellis, Elaine handed me a stack of place cards and said, "Rachel, dear, would you mind putting these out? You always do them so neatly." "No, please." No hesitation. I took the cards, laid them one by one. Mine, as always, was at the far end by the fan near the server's entrance. Nobody noticed. That was the point. At dinner, someone made a snide comment about the new estate manager being a bit too modern. Another complained about the changes in wine inventory. "No more comp cases." Uncle Grant huffed. Daniel leaned in, chuckling. "They're probably being run by some spreadsheet-happy consultant now." I took a sip of water, bit into my roast chicken, said nothing. They had no idea that every bottle on the table, every vine outside, every parking space and maintenance policy, all of it now bore my silent signature. And still I played the ghost. Not out of fear, out of control. Let them finish their wine. Let them make one last toast to themselves tomorrow. I'd remind them what power looks like when it's earned, not inherited. Dinner was set under the canopy of wisteria vines and hanging lights, curated as always to look effortlessly elegant. Strings of conversation threaded down the long table, interrupted only by the occasional laugh or clink of fine crystal. The wine was Whitmore Vintage, though now bottled under a new label. No one at the table noticed, or if they did, they assumed it was a rebranding. Daniel was seated beside me, sipping a 2015 Merlot and recounting some anecdote about a colleague who mistook Napoleon III for Napoleon, the first on a midterm. I was smiling, nodding, but not listening. My hand was on my lap phone, buzzing silently. One word from Ethan. "Ready?" I glanced through the hanging vines, caught sight of him in the distance, standing just outside the stone arch that led to the private dining patio. A wine steward by his side, notes folded in his hand. I replied, "Do it!" Ethan stepped forward. He tapped his spoon against his wineglass. Once, twice. The sound rang clear through the evening air. Slowly, the table quieted. Heads turned. Laughter dimmed. "Good evening, everyone!" Ethan began, his voice calm, steady. "I hope you're enjoying your dinner before dessert is served. We have a brief announcement from estate management." Ellen arched an eyebrow. Claire leaned back in her chair and pulled her shawl tighter. Daniel kept his glass halfway to his lips. "As many of you know," Ethan continued, "the estate underwent a change in ownership earlier this year. While much of the transition was kept private to ensure a smooth handover, we're now honored to share the name of the principal owner, the woman whose vision is behind every improvement you've seen this weekend." He paused. "Look directly at me." My chair scraped lightly against the stone as I stood. Ethan smiled. "Please join me in recognizing Miss Rachel Morgan." Silence. No gasps, no clapping, just stunned, open-mouthed silence. I stepped forward, heels clicking like gavel strikes on stone. Claire blinked slowly, like her mind couldn't process what she'd heard. Uncle Grant set down his fork with a dull clatter. Ellen's wineglass tipped sideways, crimson liquid blooming across her ivory tablecloth like a slow-moving bruise. She didn't even notice. Daniel turned toward me completely still and said nothing. His eyes locked onto mine like he was seeing a stranger. I reached the head of the table, Elaine's usual seat. I didn't sit. I didn't need to. I picked up the microphone. Ethan had discreetly sat there. I looked at them, each one slowly, deliberately. And then I smiled. "Don't worry," I said, voice calm. "Clear. You're all still welcome here." A pause just long enough for them to feel it, just like everyone else now. I let the silence thicken, let them choke on the sudden equality they'd never imagined. "No more legacy discounts," I added. "No more backdoor bookings. No more family-only wine shipments. This is now a working vineyard and a public one. Your names no longer move mountains here." Still no sound. Just a kind of quiet collapse, like glass shattering behind closed doors. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Elaine tried to smile, but it came out warped, strained like someone wearing pearls over panic. I handed the mic to the pianist. He nodded, struck a single low note on the keys, then transitioned into something soft and distant, almost melancholy. I turned and walked away before anyone could rise to their feet or fake applause. The gravel path crunched beneath me. Each step felt lighter than the last, but by the time I reached the courtyard, I could finally exhale. For the first time in 10 years. I had spoken without asking permission. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't pointed fingers. I didn't need to. The truth had already done the work. The woman they forgot to include in dinner photos. The woman they asked to pass the napkins to fix the place. Cards to check the oven. She now owned the deed. 2 nights later, I stood behind the curtain of the vineyard's event hall, listening to the soft hum of string instruments and the clinking of champagne flutes. The cocktail reception for legacy families was a tradition. Usually, Elaine would give a short speech about community heritage and upholding the Whitmore name. This year, she wasn't invited to speak. This year, I was. I waited until the room settled, until the servers began their final lap collecting empty glasses and laying down coasters with the new logo Northwood Harvest embossed in soft gold. Then I stepped onto the small wooden platform beneath a warm halo of light. A few heads turned. Then a few more conversations halted mid-sentence. I tapped the microphone. "Good evening." Polite, silence. Tense, brittle. "Some of you already know me," I continued. "Some of you thought you did." A few tight chuckles, nervous glances. I advanced to the next slide on the screen behind me. A clean aerial rendering of the vineyard's southern end, reimagined with new trails cabins and a glass-fronted wellness center surrounded by lavender fields. "We'll be expanding operations in the spring," I said. "New cabins, sustainable upgrades. A wellness center focused on agricultural healing and mindfulness. We're also adding a community dock for lake kayaking programs open to local families year-round." Claire straightened in her seat. Uncle Grant squinted. Daniel stood at the back, half-shadowed. I clicked again. The next slide displayed a name etched onto a stone plaque. The Cecilia Morgan Fund. Elaine visibly leaned forward. It's named after my mother, I said. She cleaned motel rooms for 16 years. She raised me on her own with nothing but a greenhouse and grit. And she taught me that respect is earned, not inherited. The room chilled. Elaine's expression froze, a smile collapsing behind her eyes. Claire blinked slowly, like she had misread the words. Daniel's hand twitched, but I didn't look away. I clicked to the final slide. A title. Private Lease Review, Summer Season. Beneath it, a list of initials and parcel codes. Meaningless to most, but not to them. We'll also be reviewing all long-term private lease agreements. I said casually, like discussing weather, especially those obtained through outdated personal arrangements. The room. Once still, Grant had 2 properties, both leased through handshake deals in the 90s. Claire's husband held another under a corporate shell. Elaine had been subletting the guest cottage illegally to a luxury travel agency for years. I didn't need to say names, but they knew. We want this land to serve its community, I said, voice level. And to do that, it can't continue to serve privilege under the table. I stepped off the platform. The pianist picked up a soft jazz standard background noise to cover panic as I walked through the crowd. No one stopped me. Claire's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Uncle Grant glanced at the screen, then at his phone. Elaine clutched her pearls literally. Then came Marcus Daniel's cousin. "Rachel," he said, hurrying to catch up. "Hey, can we talk?" I paused just long enough to let the pause sting. "Sure," I said. "You can book an appointment through guest services, just like everyone else." And I walked away outside. The night was cooler than usual. The moon hung low over the vines. I stepped into the dark heels, crunching gravel breath steady. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be noticed. I wasn't performing. I wasn't shrinking. I was rewriting the rules. And this time, I was the one holding the pen. By morning, the emails began. First came Claire, a carefully worded message, with the subject line misunderstanding. She wrote about family legacy, how she assumed the lease was grandfathered, and how she was always under the impression that subletting was allowed for longtime members. I forwarded the message to legal. By noon, Claire's voice memo arrived 5 minutes long with the word mistake used 7 times. Tradition 4. And please whispered twice. She had earned over 40 in sublet profits the past 3 years. None of it reported. All of it in violation of the lease terms. I didn't reply. I simply instructed my team to forward the data to the State Department of Revenue, accompanied by a quiet recommendation for a forensic audit. 3 days later, she received a formal request from the state. I didn't gloat. I didn't even tell her. I just forwarded her a list of trusted CPAs with a simple note. You'll want someone thorough. Then came Uncle Grant. He'd been using his 2 properties as private tasting rooms, meaning he charged select guests under the table while still using estate utilities and resources. He hadn't paid proper site fees in over a decade. I didn't revoke his lease. I gave him 30 days to vacate, then transferred the property to a nonprofit that runs therapeutic retreats for veterans. The team moved in by July. Honest. His voicemail came in that night, full of disbelief. "Rachel, honey, this has got to be a mix-up. I mean, we're family." I didn't answer because family to him was only sacred when it served him. And then there was Elaine. She showed up without warning. No call, no appointment. Just appeared in my office lobby, wearing her usual pearls and a blazer. Too stiff for July. "I just want to talk," she said, smile painted perfectly woman to woman. I nodded toward my office. She sat down and launched into a monologue about the importance of unity, about what people might say if the family fractured publicly. "This isn't about me," she said, folding her hands. "It's about Daniel." That was when I opened my desk drawer. I pulled out an envelope I had prepared the moment escrow closed. Inside were documents, emails from 3 former employees, sworn statements, detailing inappropriate comments Elaine made to junior staff. One calling a young intern a mouthy little thing and writing, I had settled those cases quietly when I acquired the estate, offering apologies, severance packages, and letters of support for their future employment. I handed her the envelope, didn't say a word. Her smile cracked. Her hands trembled. I didn't know those had been filed, she said quietly. They hadn't. I replied until I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. This isn't about threats, Elaine, I added. It's about truth. If you ever go public, paint yourself the victim. This will go public too. I hope we understand each other. We did. She stood slowly nodding and left without finishing her sentence. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Boundaries enforced with grace and steel. And Daniel, he never fought me. Not once. After the announcement, he spiraled. At first, it was quiet. Longer walks distracted dinners. Then came the long conversations neither of us had dared to start for years. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. One night, we were sitting on the porch overlooking the vineyard, a bottle of wine untouched between us. Because you never asked, I said. I thought I didn't need to. He replied, and his voice cracked in a way that made me want to hold him and push him away all at once. That's the problem, I said. You didn't think you needed to. There were tears, long silences, late-night unpacking of 10 years of avoidance, application, and polite distance. In the end, I said something I hadn't realized until the words left me. I didn't stay because I was waiting to be accepted by your family. I stayed because I hoped one day you'd see me, not stand beside me at dinner, not say the right things after the fact, but really see me. And now, he asked. Now I see myself, I said. And that's enough. He moved out a few weeks later, quietly, respectfully. Not enemies, but no longer partners. And somehow, that hurt less than I thought it would. Because I wasn't walking away bitter. I was walking away whole. 3 days later, I woke before sunrise. No alarm, no emails, just instinct. The house was silent. The kind of silence that didn't ask for permission. It just wrapped around you and held steady. I brewed coffee barefoot, hair tied back, wearing the same oversized sweatshirt I used to wear in college. There was something sacred in the ordinariness of it. I stepped onto the dock with a mug in hand and watched the mist hover over the lake, like it too was learning to let go. For the first time in a decade, I felt like I wasn't holding my breath. Not for an invitation, not for approval, not for someone to notice me at the table. Just stillness, and it was enough. The vineyard below was quiet. Rows of vines lined like brushstrokes against the hills. Somewhere beyond them, crews were preparing for the wellness center construction. Plans were in motion, roots expanding. I wasn't waiting to be accepted anymore. I was deciding what came next. Later that morning, I walked the grounds with Ethan. We talked about rebuilding the east greenhouse, the one that had collapsed during last winter storm. I told him I wanted to name it after my mother. He nodded without needing an explanation. Staff passed us and smiled. Not out of fear or obligation, but because they finally knew who I was and because I saw them back. There was no more pretending, no more shrinking to fit a room that was never meant to hold me. That afternoon, I drafted a letter to the estate's long-term employees, the ones who had worked under 3 generations of Whitmores and been forgotten in every newsletter. In it, I thanked them. I told them this land wasn't just shifting owners, it was shifting values. And if they ever wanted to pitch an idea, a memory, a lesson that had been overlooked, my door was open, always. I signed it with my full name. Not as a formality, but as a promise. Rachel Morgan, owner, Northwood Harvest. A week later, I stood in the great hall alone. The long wooden table, polished regal, once the symbol of every room I didn't belong to, was empty. Sunlight streamed through the cathedral windows, casting gold across the chairs where the they once sat, laughed. Excluded, corrected. It used to be their table. Now it was mine. Not metaphorically, legally, completely unequivocally and strangely. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. I pulled out a chair near the head, not Elaine's old spot. Not Daniel's, but the one near the window. The one I was never invited to sit at. I rested my hands on the smooth wood and remembered every time I was handed someone else's napkin. Every time I was spoken over. Every time my worth was measured in how quietly I served. They used to speak about legacy like it belonged to them. Inherited, embossed, untouchable. But legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you leave behind when you finally stop asking permission. Outside, a group of schoolchildren toured the vineyard. One of them pointed at the irrigation panel I helped design 3 years ago, the one that cuts water use by 60% and keeps the vines alive through harsh California summers. They didn't know my name. Not yet, but they would see the orchard I planted next spring, the scholarship program opening this fall, the community garden where the tennis court used to be. And they'd know that someone had turned this place into something more than a backdrop for cocktail dresses and Christmas cards. Back inside, I walked it the length of the table, trailing my fingers along the edge. I thought about Daniel. We still talk sometimes not about the estate or the divorce paperwork, but about books, mutual friends, memories softened by time. There's no bitterness, only space, and finally, honesty. I thought about my mother, what she would say if she saw this place. The gallery with her name etched in glass. The old greenhouse now restored with new solar roofing. She never saw herself as a woman of power, but her hands built my foundation. And I thought about the version of me who first walked through these doors 10 years ago, clutching a salad bowl, smiling too wide, praying not to spill anything on the linen napkins. She thought that if she was quiet enough, polite enough, helpful enough, she'd be allowed to belong. If I could speak to her now, I wouldn't tell her to be louder. I'd tell her, you were never meant to fit into their world. You were meant to build your own. And you did. Before I left the room, I turned back one last time not to remember, but to anchor the truth, that when they refused to give me a seat, I built the table. And it's not just mine. It's open to the people who work hard, to the ones overlooked, to the women like my mother, invisible to history but fierce in impact, so let them raise their glasses elsewhere. I'll be here building something that doesn't need their name to matter.